Go.
Well, let's start with the chat. Hi, Stan. That comes from Neil Turlick, out from the wild, wild east from Michigan.
Okay. Hello and good morning.
So allow me to stumble all over myself as I've been intimately involved in the last several months of putting this together. And it's my duty today, December 15th, 220. Is to explain kind of the intro and the ideas that that Magmachem has discovered and put in geologic context. So we start with this statement. Blank created the universe a long time ago. The universe, our solar system, started density stratifying itself from the sun. So the rock closest to the sun is the most dense, and the rocks that are floating out in the ice belt are the least dense. Well, our planet was doing the same thing since it was putting itself together, all the way up until the moment that planetesimal hit us and turned into the moon. It was density stratifying itself now. It's building a layered mantle that is density stratified, just like the solar system is. So now we have a real foundation here, and we call it the magma metal series. It's a layered earth model that can predict where this rock that you're looking at on the surface potentially came from and what depth. And when you do that, you find all these interesting anomalies in elemental data. And the anomalies across the surface of the earth are correlatable when you have the layered mantle as a reference frame. So the solar system was doing it. Our planet is doing it through geologic time, but it gets more interesting. Our planet is a water planet, okay? So we're floating around the sun, allowing just the right gravitational forces of our own planet and relative to the sun to hold water. Mars couldn't do it. Venus couldn't do it. There's no other planet that we're aware of that could do what our planet did.
It's liquid water.
It's holding liquid water. So now we have this planet that's spinning around the sun. It's density stratified. It held water. The water is now interacting through geologic time with peridiotites, with mantle petrology, with mantle rocks. As the earth was lithifying and becoming the earth that we see today, a very important thing happens at about 3.8 billion years ago. Serpentinites and the serpentosphere. There's a rock layer that now revolves around the whole planet, and it's serpentinite. It's a rock called serpentinite, and this is where it gets even better and more fun. Serpentinite is the hydration of peridotite. It's when water interacts with mantle rocks, it makes a new rock. That's called mass fractionation. That's a rock being made, and that's mass fractionation, but there's a bunch of water involved. There's 40% volume of water in this rock making process, I think. There's a lot of water in this rock.
14 weight.
14 weight percent. Sorry, I said 40, it's 14. Thanks for the fact check. All right, stay with me now.
A bunch of facts.
So we're done with the solar system. We're stratified. We have this layered mantle that Stan has put together and using the chemistry and the elemental makeup of our planet and bound by the physics of density stratification and all those laws that we have to abide by to make something like this. We have a layered mantle. Now you make this rock serpentinite around the planet. You hydrogenate a peridotite. It makes serpentinite. Now you dehydrate the serpentinite to make steatite. So now we're starting to fractionate even further into the system through geologic time and the rock record. This is all happening. We've captured all this data, and we're telling this story. So we start with the mantle. It's density stratified. That's this layer here. We make the serpentosphere. We now take heat. So what's cool about serpentinite is it's shearable. It's incredibly shearable. That's its magical power, if you will. It's shearable. It's the lubricant for plate tectonics. If we didn't have serpentinite, which is this incredibly shearable rock, it's able to do this really efficiently, then plate tectonics would not move the same. So it's very, very important in that sense. But then it also has kerogen. And see, our concept of kerogen is that it's a solid state hydrocarbon. That's kerogen, and it's found on Mars. It's found on meteorites. It's universal in in it's just a universal substance. It's found in mantle periddotites. It's been found in serpentinites. It's been found in talc, quartz, dolomite, black shales. There's a hydrocarbon marker that we're following through this story. So you've heard me talk about all these big ideas, but we have kerogen that is keeping us on track, and we have structural geology and everything else we use as tools to figure this out. All right, so now we're in serpentinite. It's shearable rock. It can move really easy. If you get an energy release from our planet, from the inside of our star, right? An energy release comes up into the serpentosphere, breaks through some kind of rifting, some kind of geologic event. You have an energy release through this event. It dehydrates the serpentinite. And like a bullet from a gun, the brine is coming out of the serpentinite, and it's making the process of steatization. So now we have a kerogen-filled, elementally filled brine that's coming out of serpentinite. It's making steatite, which is talc and carbonates, and that's the next story. So this is steatization, this process of following.
Which
now,
is a dehydration of serpentinite.
Is that what I said? Or?
No.
Uh-oh. All right, I'm getting excited. So hydrogenation or hydrated peridotite is serpentinite. Dehydrated serpentinite is steatite. All right, we're following water now. It's not just about mass fractionation rock to rock. Serpentinite turns into talc. That's mass fractionation. We're talking fluid now, fluid fractionation. This brine is moving through this system too, and that's fractionating. And what the brine is made out of, its bulk composition, has a lot to say on how you're going to predict on what it's going to make maybe up further. So steatization gets us into this subcritical, supercritical boundary where the density of water changes from 0.3 to 1. Think about that. You're standing on a beach. The ocean's flowing in and out, and you have water, you have sand saturated foundation. You're sinking in. It's saturated with water with a density of 1. At this point in our crust, the density is 0.3. So what kind of saturation of water in the rocks and in this process is happening below this supercritical, subcritical boundary? It's fascinating to think about. It's not the same. It's not how we study it on the surface, right? Density of water drastically changed, different. 30% of what the density is above this line. What also happens above this line is we find diamondoids. The generation of diamondoids in oil, and the oil generation window is at depths that we're talking about, at temperatures of 400 degrees Celsius. At 11 to 15 kilometers, this is the oil window. The oil generation window is here. And you're tracking this process to make a prediction ultimately in the reservoirs we're drilling in using the chemical makeup of this thing, using the idea of mass fractionation and liquid fractionation. Paragenesis, this process that's happening as the rock is becoming a rock and as the reservoir is becoming a reservoir from our perspective in geologic time, it's fractionating, and that allows us to be predictable. And that's what we're trying to do at the end of the day. This model we've given it to everyone. That's what this webinar series is about. It's here. Use it with your data to make more geologic distinctions, but more importantly, become more predictable in your geologic interpretations. Stan?
Follow along with Mitch here on the pointer. Okay, for those that have been attending every one of these things, a couple things got added here during the course of the webinar series. Specifically, we put this reduced hydrocarbon mud brine and oxidized carbonate mud brines. Now, that came out of the mud volcanism that I was reviewing. And so we show this split down here. And it turns out that shows up in mud volcanoes as two types of waters, main types of waters. A high salinity water, which is often associated with hydrocarbons. And that's part of a reduced fluid pathway. And a oxidized carbonate mud brine story, which is much more low salinity and in carbonate muds. Now, if you're at a place like any mud volcano and you taste the mud, you'll find that it's a lot less saline than the brine pools, which are typically parked next to it, which are coming from this. And those two fluid types appear to be related to a separation that may go all the way back down into the supercritical, subcritical boundary zone. Down at, say, 10 kilometers or more. And these muds typically have similar compositions. They commonly have a high magnesium content. And the overall suggestion is that these muds are not just recycled from the near surface, they're recycled from the deep. And so anyway, the mud volcanism discussions help focus this whole bifurcation a lot better. Okay, so now let's go back down to our main object of the day, which is Gouda.
All right, here's the case history and the major takeaways.
Okay, so we're going to go through these in sequence, and then we're going to conclude it with a sort of a series of slide prompters, which hopefully will lead into an audience participation discussion at the end. But what we want to do here is emphasize 6 main points in sequence. Overall reservoir context for Gouda accumulation is that of a large injectite-bearing mud volcano. The reservoir itself is in an injectite. That's a major thing for the oil business, that a lot of their so-called sands are actually silica injectites. And we'll show some beautiful examples of those, not just at Gouda, but one at Panther Beach. That should be on everybody's must list.
And it reminds me that I forgot something in the intro real quick, that the UDH model is scale in size. It's crustal scale in size. That was an important part that I kind of missed.
We'll be emphasizing that at the end.
Okay.
Going from micro to monster.
Oh, yeah. Okay. All right.
Now, the oil was made in situ during the formation of the mud volcano. And its main host is a porous silica dolomitic injectite phase. Not sedimentational at all. This thing was a mud injectite that's incorporating the oil. So that's a major rethink of how you want to talk about your reservoirs. 3, oil is basically the S1 component of hydrogenated bitumen component of kerogen. And it was made also, that hydrogenation effect occurred during the formation of the Gouda mud volcano.
S1 in rock eval paralysis is synonymous with hydrogenated bitumen of kerogen?
Yes.
Wow. So where you have high S1 in your rock eval paralysis, you are in a hydrogenation part of the sequence?
Yeah, without going too much into what rock eval is. In fact, that should be the subject of a whole other webinar, which we're not getting around to. But because we have the slides, but we're not going to use them today. But to review just a bit, that's distinguished from S2, which is not the oil component. It's a high temperature gas component, which burns off at about 450 degrees centigrade, but it's essentially gas coming off of a kerogen slag, a refractory slag, whereas the S1 component is near liquid and wants to make oil.
Right.
And that's ultimately what comes off. And that's what, if you're playing the rock eval game, you should be tracking S1, not S2. And you should rethink, in fact, you should invert your interpretation of the S1 to S1 plus S2 ratio, which is also known as the productivity index.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't want it. That's not the way to think about it. Just think about S1 and then go to a simple S1, S2 ratio. We can talk about that later.
Yeah.
4, Gouda formed as an in situ type of oil reservoir, and we have some beautiful slides of how that shows where it literally blew up into non-connected moldic porosity.
Mm-hmm.
And the point is that you had to make it there, that moldic porosity, because it's non-connected. It makes it really tough for something to migrate into it, as we'll see in another couple of other cases. Hydrocarbon compounds, platinum group element, rhenium in particular, were identified in Gouda kerogens, and that's common to all deep source kerogens, and that takes you back into some kind of an ultramafic mantle source possibility, and serpentinite is a hydrated version of that. And then the conversion, and this is a necessary condition for oil formation, of kerogen into oil was predated by diamondoids formation in the presence of bromic Lewis acid brine. This is a really important point. What we're going to see at Gouda is a systematic correlation between the fluid component, which becomes more and more acid, and more bromic Lewis acid in particular. And it's Lewis acid brines are the pathway, the chemical pathway that the industry makes diamondoids out of. And we see that going on at Gouda. So the brines are not there by accident. They are active chemical participants in the paragenetic reaction sequence that leads to oil formation.
But when you put it in a jar, they separate. They're like, I don't like you, you don't like me, I'm going this way, you go that way. So it makes you think that there's a natural, non-attraction.
Yeah, that separation is way more dynamic than that. It's going to depend on the density and compositions of the participants in the first place.
Sure. I'm just
and
saying.
If you heat it up or heat it down, then that boundary expands or contracts. But It is ultimately immiscible.
Interesting.
But the brines and the oil are there for a reason, and they are genetically related. There's no question about it.
Beautiful. Okay, and then we'll end it with implications and just an open discussion.
Yep.
Let's talk about Gouda.
Here we are. Gouda's up at the top of the world in the Barents Sea. It's literally formed right at a hotspot triple junction between one of the cracks of the world that goes across northern Greenland, comes into the Barents. It's the top of the northernmost Atlantic that goes between Norway and Greenland, and then out through the Barents and into ultimately connecting it through Siberia. Importantly, it's linked to other things that are going on at the same time. This is an event horizon that's going on between 255 and 245.
Wow.
And as it's going down, the Oslo triple junction is forming near Oslo. Some of the proto-North Sea Permian events are going on, and especially the Zechstein Basin.
What? That's the Kupferschiefer?
And there's a major hotspot near Berlin, which is part of the Kupferschiefer hotspot. There's a whole series of things in southern Germany and southwest Poland that are linked into that. And I would suggest that's also an interesting oil play, except you'd have to drill into central Berlin. I don't think the Germans would appreciate that.
Wow. So this is the same timeline across this area?
Yes.
This is a huge
now,
area.
Up here, there's no major human inhabitants, so you can...
1,000 kilometers.
What?
Holy cow. I'm just looking at the scale of this.
Yeah.
Wow. Laurentia. Everybody remembers Laurentia.
Well, these are all different fragments of Pangea, and they reflect the breakup of Pangea.
Global scale.
Yeah, and we're going to see that in a minute.
Wow.